Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1094. Monday, and I believe it's the 5th. I think it's the 5th. Losing track of the days, but I do know it's Monday and I do know it's TowerGate day 1094. Thank you so much for all the wonderful comments in the comment section, and hello out there to all the new subscribers. Welcome to the TowerGate videos. Okay, so today, of course, the second half of the video will be of course, naming the dumbass of the week. We'll go through that as we normally do, but I'm probably going to have to blow through that pretty quickly because we have a really big story, an important story that I want to cover and spend most of the first half of the video on because it actually is it's a story it's not quite out there all over the place. It's popping up a few places, and it's really a story that combines three different stories we talked about last week. That being the firing of Michael Atkinson, also the news of John Durham making that special trip, if it was a special trip, to Washington, D.C., and of course what he's investigating, looking at the ICA and this group called the National Intelligence Council. Now all these things kind of play together, and so there's a really good story that lays out a scenario that I want to share with all of you. It's not what I would say a proven theory at this point, but it certainly answers a lot of questions that I've been raising over the past week. This past week, when I covered these three stories, I said there were some things that were a little strange about all three of these stories, and so this information ties those things together. So I definitely want to spend some time on that, and so that's what we'll be doing today mostly, and then there's just a couple of news items I'll get to before we get right into that. So the first news item from yesterday, of course, was a story in Gateway Pundit where they basically state that the government, and this is referring to the coronavirus situation, that the government has overestimated hospitalizations from coronavirus by 8 times, the number of ICU beds that they would need by 6 times, and the number of ventilators that they would need by about 40 times. And of course, this all comes because that they were working from these models, which we keep hearing about. Although we learned last week that the major model, the primary model, and in the case of Dr. Birx, the only model she really was using was this model that comes from the Bill Gates Foundation, of which she is a member of. So again, there's a lot of people, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I did the other day talk about it. I saw a lot of the comments in the comments section. I think a lot of people are feeling about the same way, that there's a whole lot of things about this coronavirus and the way this came down and the way it's been handled, and there's a lot of questions that are going to be having to be asked when this is gone about these models and a lot of other things, because there certainly are some questions that are being raised here, because there's some things that are not adding up, if you know what I mean. So a lot of us suspect that there may be some bad intentions going on here, and you know, it's sad to even suggest something like that, especially with a situation this serious. But knowing what we know about the deep state and knowing what we know about the globalists and those type of people, I don't put anything past them. Anything. Whether it's the John F. Kennedy assassination, 9/11, all these major events that are absolutely horrific. People will say, well, that's just so horrific, and if you suggest that there may be foul play, they'll accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist, a crazy person, and all these other things, because it's hard for people to wrap their mind around the fact that there is such evil in the world that they would do these kind of things, and especially that they would be, somehow entrenched within our government. But I've been watching this government long enough to know that they're certainly not above anything, and that's why I am skeptical. And with all these other things that we're seeing here, I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered here in the very near future. So anyway, models. What good are they? Apparently not much. Now we're getting a story now that Boris Johnson, first they locked down all of 10 Downing Street, I understand, where he is, and apparently his symptoms are getting worse, and they've taken Boris Johnson to the hospital. Now, he is the, top guy in the country, the prime minister, so obviously even a slight case of the sniffles will probably get him probably a quicker trip to the hospital than it would you or I. But I have to assume that there's something a little more going on here. But hopefully Boris Johnson's okay and he'll recover fully. Hopefully he's not too bad off there. He's not that old of a guy. He looks pretty healthy. So hopefully Boris Johnson's going to be okay, but he has now been taken to the hospital. We're also getting this story that was covered by Crystal Ball on the Hill day before yesterday, which didn't get very much play initially, but now some people are starting to pay attention to it. And essentially what she was talking about in this particular segment she was doing was that it's proven, it's known, it's a fact that Joe Biden has contacted on a couple of occasions, in fact very recently, Commie Bernie, and has sort of told Commie Bernie, hey, this thing's over, man. You really need to get out of it because you're prolonging the process. It's causing a problem. You really need to get out. Apparently, Bernie's saying, I'm not really going to get out. Now, here's the other part of this story, which is not 100% proven, but is being speculated on or rumored that this is something that may be happening right now. It's being rumored that possibly in a follow-up phone call after that phone call where Bernie turned down Joe Biden when Biden suggested he needs to get out of the race, and Bernie turned him down, apparently there's a follow-up phone call where Biden may have offered Bernie a cabinet position. A cabinet position. Now, they're worried so much that they're not going to get the Bernie voters, but I don't care if they give Bernie a cabinet position or not. A good 10 to 15% of Bernie bros are not going to vote for Biden under any circumstances, even if he gives Bernie a cabinet position. But I'm thinking when I hear this story, what cabinet position would you give Bernie if you're Joe Biden? There's not, when you have a cabinet member, they are sort of leading the executive branch's policy initiatives. And they need to be coordinated with at least their party members in the Congress, or it's self-defeating. It doesn't go anywhere. You really can't have an administration with a policy that completely differs from that of the members of Congress in the same party. Of course, they're going to differ from the opposition party, but not the same party. In other words, Biden can't put Bernie in a position in the cabinet where he is going to have a policy position that no Democrats in Congress can support, or very few. A very unpopular position. So where would you put Bernie? I mean, you wouldn't make him Health and Human Services because he would be pushing Medicare for all, and we already know that there aren't the Democrat votes in Congress, nor do the Democratic leadership support anything like that. Biden doesn't support it. I mean, you can't have people in your cabinet who do not agree with you if you're the president. Biden is not for Medicare for all. So he's certainly not going to put Bernie in as his Director of Health and Human Services, who will be pushing for Medicare for all. That's not going to work. So what other position? What, Secretary of Defense? I don't think so. Secretary of Labor? I don't think so. I just see where a cabinet position, a cabinet level position, that is a guy that's going to be creating policy that the president is going to have to be on board with, that they're going to try to work with their members and even reach across the aisle to get other members of the other party to do these things. The cabinet level positions are work with the bureaucracies. You can't have a head of your you can't have a cabinet member and the head of your administration who's at odds not only with the president, his boss, but the majority of members of his party in Congress and the bureaucracy. And there is no policy position I can think of that Bernie has that he could take with him in a cabinet position and try to roll out to the larger bureaucracy or to the Congress. So this could only happen if Bernie were to adopt Biden's position and not support a Medicare for all, or not support this, or not support that. He would have to make a major shift in his policy, and of course once he announced that, he would lose a lot of support, and so those Bernie bros wouldn't show up anyway. In fact, they might actually get more pissed off, and you might drive more of them away. So I don't really see how that works. But this is what's being rumored. Is now it's no rumor that Biden called Commie Bernie and said, hey, you need to get out. That definitely happened. But Bernie rejected it. And apparently the rumor is that a follow-up call was made where Biden's now offering cabinet position. That is a rumor. And that may just be a rumor because I don't know. If I were Biden's people, I would not be advising him to do that. If I were the Democratic Party, I would not be advising them to do that. I just don't see, it doesn't make any sense. I don't see where there's a win there. It looks like it would be worse. It would complicate things, make things worse. For Biden, for the party, I don't see it working. But that is what is being reported as rumor as to what may have happened in that follow-up phone call. But I don't think it'll pay off, and I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it makes sense. But who knows? Maybe Biden's campaign is so desperate to get Bernie out of the race, they're willing to waive a cabinet position at him. I just don't know what that would be. Okay. Now, I want to get right to this fantastic story. And I don't know how many of you ever frequent the website Patriot Soapbox, but it's a website that I go to probably a couple times a week. I don't know who really runs that website. You see various contributors there, but they do a lot of good work there. And I've gotten quite a few good stories, and they've been ahead of the curve on some stories that are in my timeline. I've referred to them before in the past 3 years. I've been doing TowerGate videos. They've done a very good job. Probably some of the best information I've gotten on the whole Ukraine hoax thing. They were doing very good work there as far as digging into Sharamella, digging into Atkinson, digging into these relationships, Mary McCord, and all this. They were very early on, ahead of everybody, even ahead of Conservative Treehouse, as a matter of fact, on this particular issue. So I do give a certain degree of credibility to Patriot Soapbox and some of the contributors there. And again, I don't know who runs that site, but they have some very good contributors and good researchers. They're similar to Conservative Treehouse. They don't have as large a platform, I don't think, but they have some good people there, and they have a tendency to do some very cutting-edge stories, and they have some good researchers. They do good research there. So anyway, that is the source of this story. If anybody wants to check it out, Patriot Soapbox. And it's patriotsoapbox.com if you want to go over there. And it's a site you guys might want to pay attention to if you don't already. Now, what this story does, and the reason why I found it to be a pretty fantastical story, well worth talking about, is because it really ties together 3 stories that I covered last week. And in all 3 of these stories, I raised questions. I said, that's interesting. First, we had the story about Atkinson being fired. And I said, well, if you look at Trump's letter, he doesn't state cause, other than the fact that he don't like the guy. And everybody knows Trump doesn't like the guy. He was obviously involved in the Ukraine hoax, whistleblower thing. He's got connections to all these shady people. And for that, yes, Trump obviously would have wanted him fired. But he's wanted him fired since, going back to the end of last year when this all first came up. Now, Trump has been exonerated or acquitted 3 months ago. So if he were just going to do it purely out of spite to get rid of Atkinson because he's a bad guy, he could have done it 3 months ago, because by then Trump had already been acquitted, so they couldn't come back and say, well, you're obstructing the hearings or the investigation or whatever. So he was clear to do it months ago. But most importantly, he does not state in the letter, nor did he say anything in his press conference when he was asked about there being cause. Now, as you know, I mentioned yesterday, I said, the president can fire, an inspector general. He appoints them. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. But it doesn't mean that he can just fire him without cause. There usually has to be a cause when you're firing a senior executive service employee, which all inspector generals are SES. What is senior executive service? Well, it means a lot of things, but in a very practical way of explaining it, SES person in government is very similar to a college professor who has tenure. You really can't get rid of them. They've been in the bureaucracy like Atkinson for over 20 years. He's been a top DOJ lawyer for over 20 years, been involved in the intelligence community, the DOJ, the NSD. He's been around and around. He is a senior executive service level employee. You can't just fire him for the hell of it or because you got a problem with what he did. Now, there has been no investigation into, unlike Strzok and McCabe, who got fired because there was internal investigations within the FBI. They looked at both of those guys and said, okay, yeah, these guys need to be fired. And they were fired. Trump fired Comey, but he fired him with cause. Failure of leadership and badly mishandling the situation with the Right Reverend Clinton investigation. And no one questioned that. Everyone understood, yeah, Comey was a bad FBI director. There was no real issue. There was some people that cried about it, but ultimately it wouldn't have been hard to prove the case that he deserved to be fired for failure to provide leadership and his mishandling of the Right Reverend Clinton email investigation, his leaking of memos which he was being investigated for. There was a lot of reasons to get rid of Comey, which was justified, who was also SES, but so were Strzok and McCabe. But they were fired because of internal investigations. But there was no internal investigation that we know of that was that found cause to fire Atkinson. None. The House, Republicans would love to have hearings, but they don't control the House, so there were no hearings. And the Senate, they could have hearings, but they have not, or have not and did not have hearings on Atkinson. So there's been talk about it, but it's not been done. And as far as we know, the DOJ, Barr, did not have any type of investigation into Atkinson's involvement in the whistleblower Ukraine hoax. The Inspector General did not have any investigation into him, as far as we know. In fact, Horowitz came out and essentially praised Atkinson after his firing. And then we have some crying and complaining by Schumer, Pelosi, and Schiff about the firing of Atkinson, but you haven't heard him actually call for any hearings into that. Now you have had Charles Grassley express concern, saying that hey, you just fired a SES employee, senior guy, we need to know more. We need to know why you fired this guy. So Charles Grassley knows the rules about firing an SES employee, and he's raising issue with it. Okay, so that is something, as you know, was a red flag to me. It's like, wow, Trump just fired a SES employee, Atkinson, without there really being any investigation showing that there was cause for the firing, other than the fact that Trump personally doesn't like him because of what he did with the Ukraine hoax. That was one story that wasn't totally adding up. And I said in the video yesterday, there has to be something else going on. Okay, that's one point. Then we had this trip that we hear about from Durham that got big news headlines 2 weeks ago. But Durham, who's headquartered in Connecticut, is a top U.S. attorney there, but his main office where the work is being done on this investigation, the Spygate thing, is being done in D.C. He comes here about every 2 weeks. It's a routine trip. He probably has conference calls. He meets with Barr. He meets with his people here. So it's not unusual. So why did he get so many headlines? And of course, we also had, again, the follow-up story that Durham was, again, looking into the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment, and how that came about. And also we heard that he was looking into this National Intelligence Council, which is a group of intelligence officials under the ODNI, and these individuals are largely staffed by CIA people. So anyway, we had all three of these stories come together, and all three of them raised questions in my mind because, in the first case of Atkinson, he's a SES employee fired for no cause. That would create issues, believe me. Then you have the Durham trip, which shouldn't have been a story, but it was. Then you had the second story about him looking into the ICA. Well, we've known that. The only thing new about it is that he was looking into this National Intelligence Council, which is kind of something new we've never heard of before, but now we do. But even that wasn't should have been a major headline story, and it really wasn't. It was the byline. It was the sub-story. So these three things all raise questions in my mind. So now we've had one of the contributors over at Patriot Soapbox that is now tied together. He has tied together these three events, and as you probably heard if you watched yesterday's video, I said I think there might be something else going on here, and that there almost had to be cause to fire Atkinson. SES employee, Inspector General, almost has to be a reason to fire him other than you don't like him. And I said maybe it has something to do with something coming out of the Durham investigation. But there's nobody. Trump ain't saying it. Barr's not saying it. Nobody's saying it. And if that was the case, they would not be able to say it because they can't comment on an ongoing investigation, especially one like Durham's conducting. So that may be why they're so quiet about it. So here is the basic nuts and bolts of what's going on with the story, tying these three things together and answering all three of my questions. So we learn from this Washington Examiner story by Jerry Dunleavy that Durham is honing in on Brennan and Clapper, and specifically looking at this National Intelligence Council. And we didn't know much about it, but this story reveals a lot more about this National Intelligence Council. And we know that the original story is that Durham came to visit 2 weeks ago. No big deal. But now we're learning that Barr had requested Durham to make a special trip. We thought the original story was Durham is coming because he wants to. Durham is coming because he wants to make sure that during the coronavirus that his people here in D.C. are not slacking off. He wants them busting their ass regardless of coronavirus. He wants to get this investigation done by the summer. But now we find out that actually Barr had requested Durham to come. That changes the equation. We knew that also in that story that it's cited as one of the reasons that Barr wanted Durham to come is because they wanted to discuss some new information on high-profile targets. Now we know that Brennan and Clapper are the two high-profile targets that they're talking about, and that the focus is on the ICA and how that came about, and this other group now within the ODNI, the National Intelligence Council. So these things are now at play. So that makes things even a bit more peculiar. Why did what was so important that during the coronavirus, Barr felt the need to tell Durham, hey, you need to come to town, we need to talk about some things. That, again, makes things a little more serious. So, what is laid out in the story here, it's kind of complex. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible and not complicate it any more than it is. But basically, what we find out is that this group, this National Intelligence Council, falls under the ODNI. That would be Clapper. But the people who are staffed at this particular National Intelligence Council are CIA employees. Now we know from this story the names of most of those people who were part of this National Intelligence Council. And why is this so important? Well, they are the ones who wrote the draft for the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment, which is what Durham is honing in on. This is what Obama used to justify everything that happened after January 2017, the Mueller witch hunt, the repeated renewals of Carter Page FISAs, all the other investigations that followed, all based on the ICA. So that's why Durham is focused so hard on it. So now we find out that the reason this National Intelligence Council is so important to Barr and Durham is because they are actually the people. And there's about, I understand, somewhere between 8 and 12 people, and we know who some of them are now, some of the key players. They're actually the ones, and they're mostly all either experts on Russia and Eurasia, or they have something to do with their experts in cybersecurity and things like that. So they're expert CIA agents specifically focused on Russia, Eurasia, and things having to do with cyber intelligence or cyber warfare, things and such. So these are the people who actually wrote the rough draft for the ICA. Then it went to the top chiefs, which would be Brennan, Clapper, Comey, and of course we know that Peter's been stroking us, would have had input on this as well as probably Bill Priestap and maybe a couple others, some legal people. So anyway, we now know what may be going on here and why Atkinson's firing may be connected to this Durham investigation into the ICA and this National Intelligence Council. And it is because we now know the names of some of the people on that National Intelligence Council, which did put together the rough draft of the ICA. Okay, so this is, remember, this is a unit within the ODNI. Clapper is the head of it, and it is staffed primarily by CIA people, which would be Brennan's people. So we now know some of the names of these people. We have this woman, Julie Garganus, Garganus. She is one of the people on this National Intelligence Council that helped write the rough draft for the ICA. She, if you look up her bio, you can see her picture, read her bio. She is a deep stater. She has very close connections to a lot of women activist groups. She's obviously a very liberal left-winger, a kind of activist intelligence woman, and she specializes in Europe and Russian affairs. Then we have another woman, Kendall Taylor, also out of CIA. She's also an expert on Russia, and she too is also associated with various left-wing organizations associated with Soros and other people, the New World Order crowd. So she's obviously a deep stater. Then we have a guy named Eric Sharamella from the CIA. Was part of writing the rough draft for the ICA. He's on that National Intelligence Council with these other deep staters. Also, an individual named Vin Nguyen, obviously a Vietnamese guy, or probably born in Vietnam, or his parents are from Vietnam. He is the top cyber guy on in this particular group at the National Intelligence Council, and he has got connections to every deep stater you can think of, including that dirtbag Michael Chertoff. He is associated with Dmitry Alperovich, one of the owners of CrowdStrike, as well as Michael McFaul, Obama's boy. So you have these people, and as you can see, Sharamella is in this group. Now, keep in mind, this is who they've been investigating. So if Sharamella, along with these other deep staters and some others, were all involved in this, and Atkinson is the top legal counsel to the lawyers at DOJ NSD who would take this intelligence community assessment that they get from the National Intelligence Council and would do the legal framework for it and the legal oversight on it. It puts Sharamella and Atkinson both working within this National Intelligence Council to put together this ICA. In other words, Michael Atkinson and Sharamella were two of the people involved in putting together the ICA, which is what set the stage for Uncle Bob the Executioner and all the other things that went on after that. So that was all relating to the Mueller witch hunt, Trump-Russia collusion, Carter Page vices, investigations into all those other people in 2017, Russian trolls, you name it. But also Atkinson and Sharamella were involved together, obviously working on the Ukraine hoax. And why would they be doing that likely? Well, very likely to cover up the fact that they were involved together and working on this National Intelligence Council, where they helped put together and approve all the stuff that was done to appoint Mueller, get the vices on Carter Page and all this other stuff. They obviously want to clean up their mess or cover up what they did. So keep in mind that putting together the intelligence community assessment, you also had, remember that you had Mike Rogers, the NSA, along with the CIA. It was FBI, CIA, and NSA who were involved in the intelligence community assessment. And as we know from the live hearings, Mike Rogers said that the NSA was only moderately confident because it wasn't quite well sourced enough for him to be fully on board with Brennan and Comey and Clapper. And we all know that Rogers has met with Durham several times now and has been assisting in the investigation. So what that means is that if in the past several weeks Durham's team has been looking into this group at the National Intelligence Council and they have interviewed these people on that council, One of them would have been Eric Sharamella. And another one they would have interviewed, certainly the two DOJ, NSD legal people who had been over looking at their draft before it going through the process of going to Brennan, Comey, Clapper, and the rest, would have been Atkinson and Mary McCord. So they would likely have already interviewed Atkinson and Mary McCord as well. So it looks like Durham's team interviews Sharamella, almost certainly being part of that team, and very likely Atkinson and McCord. And then Atkinson gets fired. So here we can kind of see how these things connect and why Trump would not be able to say what the cause was for why he fired Atkinson. Because it came from Durham's investigation. So Barr would obviously learn about all this, and that would certainly prompt him to call Durham and say, hey, you need to come to my office, we need to have a chat, and you need to talk to your people over here, because I just got this information, basically, that Sharamella was on this council that you're looking into, and here's what we've learned, and this type of thing. So it's very likely, it's very possible, I should say, that Durham's investigation into this National Intelligence Council to get to the bottom of who put together the ICA and what kind of information was used led them to discover that Sharamella was in this group, one of the CIA people in the group that helped formulate the initial ICA rough draft. And then you've got Mary McCord and Atkinson being senior legal people who would have been the ones who would have, and John Carlin was around to a certain point, and then Mary McCord, but Atkinson would have been their chief legal counsel throughout all of this. So this ties all these people together, and this may be the reason and the cause that Atkinson had to go, because they would have determined from doing these interviews of these people with the National Intelligence Council that they were involved in this plot. They were involved in putting together this ICA, which was based on a lot of hearsay bullshit, and Durham is right now trying to figure out who Brennan's mole is, and maybe through his interviews with these people he found out who the mole is, because that would be information that they would need to do the ICA, and it would have come from Brennan. So you can see that how Durham investigating this National Intelligence Council could have led to the finding that Michael Atkinson was involved in this shady stuff having to do with the ICA, and he's currently the Inspector General over the intelligence community. Well, that would cause a real problem. It would cause a real problem. Now, you think that Barr would go to Horowitz, but when you think about it, he probably wouldn't, because he doesn't want to share anything about Durham's investigation with Horowitz. We already know that Durham doesn't want to do that because he wouldn't do it before. He wouldn't tell Horowitz why he disagreed with him about whether or not the whole thing was properly predicated, because he didn't want to discuss his investigation with Horowitz. So they're kind of keeping Horowitz out of the loop because he doesn't have the need to know. He simply deals with the FBI and the DOJ oversight, internal reviews and things like that. He's nothing to do with the Durham investigation. But this would explain why Atkinson was fired, and it would be fired with cause. The cause being that he was one of the people who was part of this National Intelligence Council, along with Sharamella, that created the ICA, which led to everything that happened after 2017, and every single bit of it. If the evidence turns out to be it was all bullshit, then everything that happened after 2017 would have been bullshit, and that means that Sharamella and Atkinson and Mary McCord would all three be culpable in all of it, and therefore he would have to go. That would be a reason that Barr would summon Durham to Washington, and that would be the reason that Atkinson would be fired, and that we would not be given a reason or cause for why an SES employee would be fired without anyone telling us exactly why, other than Trump thinks he's a bad guy. Now, obviously, I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to announce the winner of Dumbass of the Week tomorrow, because I just ran out of time, but this is far more important than that. But I have all the results tallied up, and we will go through them tomorrow night, I promise. So thank you so much for tuning in. Tune back in tomorrow night. We'll announce the Dumbass of the Week, and we may have some follow-up on this story as well. You guys have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.